For the first time in his life, Jill was being praised. Voss said the party could not have defeated Demon King Valzard without him. Dane agreed right away. Rook said they would not even be alive if Jill had not guided them this far. Those words should have made him happy, and part of him really was happy, but it still felt wrong. He had never lived as someone people admired. He was born with the power to speak with the dead. From childhood, people feared him. He reacted to things no one else could see. He answered voices only he could hear. Even his parents looked at him like something was wrong. When he turned 15, the village pushed him out and called it independence. After that, his life became a long stretch of hunger and rejection. He had no talent for battle. His only gift was tied to spirits and ghosts, and no one wanted a man like that near them. Everything changed when Voss's party found him. Voss was a prodigy with twin swords. Dane was a heavy fighter with crushing power. Rook was a skilled archer. Jury supported the group with every kind of elemental magic. They saw value in Jill immediately. He could command tiny spirit fragments and send them through ruins, caves, and dungeons before anyone stepped inside. If the dead were nearby, he could learn even more. For a first-rate party, that made him the perfect mapper. For Jill, it felt like a miracle. He finally had food, work, and a place where people needed him. He stayed with them and followed them all the way to Valzard's castle. He could not fight like the others, so during the final battle he waited outside. Even so, he felt proud when they returned victorious. He had helped them reach that point, but that pride also made him decide something. Once they returned to the capital and were celebrated as heroes, he would quietly leave. He never truly saw himself as one of them. Jury noticed that at once. She was always the first to notice when he was troubled. More than once, her support had kept him moving. He could not pretend he felt nothing for her. That was why her kindness still had weight. Dane broke the mood by teasing them, and Jill let the matter drop. He asked where they were going instead. Since the battle ended, the others had been leading him somewhere, without explaining anything. The forest ended, without warning. Ahead of them lay a dead, rocky wasteland, split by a huge ravine that ran deeper than the eye could follow. This was Swandle, the valley of the evil dragon. Voss explained that long ago, a dragon powerful enough to destroy the world had been sealed at the bottom by a great sage. Even now, the dragon had not died. The magic rising from below made that clear. Over the years, many adventurers had gone down there to finish it, and none had ever returned. Jill felt uneasy the moment he looked into the abyss. A faint trace of magic brushed against him and made his skin crawl. He asked why they had brought him there. Dane answered by kicking him off the cliff. Jill reacted on instinct and caught the edge with one hand. Loose stones broke away and vanished into the dark below. He looked up and saw Voss and Dane staring down at him with cold smiles. Rook stood beside them, with a flat face that showed nothing. Dane even looked annoyed that the fall had not finished the job. Jill wanted to believe this was some horrible mistake, but he already knew it was not. Voss told him the truth without hesitation. Valzard was dead. The party would soon return to the capital as heroes. If people learned that their group included a man tied to the dead, that perfect image would be stained. Jill saw through the lie immediately. If that was the only problem, they could have thrown him out and walked away. They had brought him to Swandle because they wanted more than distance. They wanted his body gone. Voss admitted that too. Leaving Jill alive meant risk, so he had to die. Voss stepped on the hand gripping the cliff. Pain shot through Jill's fingers as Voss pressed harder and ground them into the stone. Dane calmly told him he would suffer less if he just let go. Jill held on with everything he had left and looked toward Jury. For one brief second, he thought she might stop them. He remembered how often she had encouraged him. He remembered the way she always stood close when he was at his lowest. He reached toward her with the last hope he had. Jury's troubled face slowly changed into a dark smile. She revealed that if Jill had left the party first, she would have lost the chance to kill him herself. She said she loved him, and that was exactly why she wanted to end him with her own hands. Lightning gathered in her palm. The spell hit the cliff where he was hanging. The rock shattered. His grip vanished. Jill fell into the black abyss. A sharp pain dragged him back to consciousness. He had not reached the bottom. Something had caught him halfway down. When he twisted around, he nearly stopped breathing. A human skeleton had been pinned to the cliff wall by a sword through its chest. Jill's clothes had snagged on the hilt. That was the only reason he was still alive. Then the cracked rock around the sword gave way. He hit the ground hard and somehow survived. When he forced himself up and looked back, the cliff wall was covered in skeletons. There were too many to count, at least 100, maybe more. Each one had been nailed to the rock with a sword, spear, or some other weapon driven through the chest. Their bodies had long since decayed, but their gear made it clear what they had been. Adventurers. A lot of them. Jill understood how he survived. His body had slammed into those remains again and again during the fall, and the last one had slowed him enough to keep him alive. That was horrifying on its own, but something about the scene was even worse. Those bodies had not ended up there by chance. This was not a battlefield. It was a display. He forced himself to think. If adventurers had been coming here for years, then some path in or out had to exist somewhere. So he called for spirits, the only help he had ever known. Usually, at least a few would answer. This time, nothing came. Not one. That had never happened before. He focused harder and searched for ghosts instead. With so many bodies around, there should have been countless lingering souls. Instead, he felt a crushing mass of magic. It pressed on him so hard it felt like the air itself wanted to crush him, and that terrible presence was right behind him. Jill slowly turned around. A giant shape stood in the darkness. When it stepped closer, the truth became clear. It was a dragon made entirely of bone. Its whole body was a pale skeleton wrapped in faint light. Empty eye sockets stared down at him. The pressure pouring from it left no room for doubt. This was the dragon sealed in Swandle. The dragon was surprised that Jill could see its true form. To everyone else, it still appeared as the living dragon it once had been. As it shifted, a nearby sword rose by magic, flew through the air, and buried itself through another corpse on the wall. The dragon calmly showed him how every challenger had ended. They had attacked the false living body they thought they saw, died, and joined the display. Then it turned its gaze back to him and concluded that Jill's power had to be tied directly to souls. Jill did not deny it. The dragon assumed he had come like all the others to kill it. Its killing intent sharpened at once. Jill quickly told the truth. He explained how his own party betrayed him after defeating Valzard. He explained how they brought him to the Swandle, tried to erase him, and threw him into the abyss. The dragon laughed so hard the place seemed to shake. But it was not only laughing at him, the story reminded it of its own past. It too had once trusted someone. The friend who sealed it in this place was the very human history praised as a great sage. That revelation stunned Jill. The dragon said betrayal was why it had come to hate humans and trust none of them. That included him. Its magic swelled again, and Jill knew he was seconds from death. So he made one desperate gamble. He looked up and said the dragon did not truly just want slaughter. It wanted someone to understand it. The dragon froze for a moment. If it had once called someone a friend, then somewhere inside, it had once wanted connection. The wall of corpses proved the same thing in a twisted way. If all it wanted was to kill, it could have left the bodies where they fell. Instead, it displayed them. Each corpse was a message. Hatred had turned its loneliness into something ugly, but the loneliness was still there. The dragon laughed again, longer this time. Jill thought he had failed. Instead, the dragon said it liked him. It gave its name with open pride, Veldor. Then it offered him power and asked if he wanted revenge on the people who betrayed him. Jill saw their faces again at once. Voss, Dane, Rook, Jury. He saw them looking down at him from the cliff with calm, satisfied eyes. If there really was a way to strike back, he wanted it. Veldor explained that he could give Jill the power to steal skills from the dead. Even after death, a corpse still held fragments of the soul. Those fragments carried memories of life, including the memory of skills. Because Jill could sense souls, he alone could handle such an ability. He could take those fragments, rebuild them, and make those skills his own. The corpses already hanging through the Swandle could feed him. So could anyone he killed later. Jill understood how dark that road was, but he no longer cared. Veldor explained the price. He would fuse with Jill. Jill's will would remain his own. If their souls fused the wrong way, neither of them would return to a body. They would become wandering souls forever. Veldor also admitted he had his own revenge to seek. Jill thought that sounded pointless after so many centuries, but Veldor refused to dismiss it. A man who could seal a dragon might also have found a way to escape death. Jill told him to begin. The ritual started at once. Pale light spread across Veldor's bones. At the same time, Jill's whole body locked in place. He could not move at all. Thin glowing threads ran from his chest to the center of the dragon's body. Veldor explained that their souls had to be fixed in place so they would not slip apart during the fusion. He needed a physical anchor inside Jill's body. Veldor chose the right arm. The next instant, pain tore through Jill so hard that every clear thought vanished. Veldor bit into the arm and ripped it away from the shoulder down. Jill felt the injury, heard the tearing force, and understood that his arm was truly gone. Then darkness swallowed him. When he woke again, he was still at the bottom of Swandle. Veldor was gone. In his place was only a pile of shattered white bones. Jill looked at his right side and stopped in shock. From shoulder to fingertips, a new arm had formed. It moved naturally. He called for Veldor, but no voice answered. Veldor had promised him the power to steal skills from the dead, and the Swandle around him was full of bodies. He walked to a fallen skeleton and placed the white hand on its skull. Words appeared before his eyes at once. That corpse held 3 skills: blast, wind thrust, surveying. Jill stared in disbelief. The dead adventurer had likely been a mage. Blast created a violent gust that could shove enemies away. Wind thrust formed a cutting blade of wind. Surveying helped judge distance with precision. Jill raised his white hand and used blast. A powerful gust burst forward. For the first time in his life, he had used real combat power of his own. He looked up at the wall of corpses and moved without hesitation. He cut down one body with wind thrust, let it crash to the ground, and touched a broken piece of bone. The power still worked. He gained fireball, water bullet, earth wall, magic enchantment, and another copy of wind thrust. Then something changed. the duplicate did not stay separate. It fused and became a stronger skill called Thrust Fang. That changed everything. Duplicate skills were not wasted. Even a scattered bone still held value. He used Wind Thrust again and again to cut down the corpses pinned to the walls. Each new skill made the next one easier to use. By the time he finished, he had stripped every corpse in the Swandle. There had been more than 100 of them. The result was far beyond what he expected. He gained combat skills for many weapons and close combat. He also gained body enhancement, support skills, and elemental magic. Repeated skills merged and rose higher. Fire climbed until it became explosion magic. Wind rose into storm magic. Water turned into a deadly whirlpool spell. One thing bothered him. He did not gain a single light magic skill. Some of the dead had clearly been holy users, yet their remains gave him almost nothing in that area. Maybe Veldor's power was too deeply tied to darkness. Still, he had become far stronger than any normal adventurer. But normal adventurers were not his target. Voss and the others were different. They had rare gifts, powerful skills, and real battle talent. Jill did not want to merely beat them. He wanted to crush them. He had to leave the Swandle. A thin line of light waited far above him. He used Earthwall to create small footholds along the cliff. The abyss was deeper than he first thought. The climb was possible, yet too slow. That was when the spirits finally returned. Veldor's overwhelming power had driven them away before. Now that the dragon was gone, the Swandle had begun to breathe again. Seeing them gave him a better idea. He had a skill called Magic Enchantment. It let him place magic into objects. If he could place wind magic into weapons, then maybe he could place it into spirits too. He called more of them over and used magic enchantment on the whole group. Then he filled them with blast magic. Wind swirled around their soft little bodies at once. Jill ordered them to spread upward through the Swandle. One after another, they floated into place above him. He jumped onto the nearest one. The spirit held firm for an instant, then released the stored wind. The burst launched him upward like a cannon shot. Jill landed on the next spirit, then the next. Every step sent him even higher. The dark cliff walls blurred past. The first thing he saw was the same cliff where Voss and the others had betrayed him. That alone made his chest burn, but he pushed the feeling down and moved into the great forest. He had once traveled this route as the party's mapper, so he still remembered the land well enough. At first, he thought the nearest town should be his next stop. A town meant a graveyard. A graveyard meant more bodies and more skills. It sounded like the right path, but the forest gave him something else first. Hidden in the brush, he found a ghost standing over a dried corpse. Jill touched the remains and gained 2 small skills, trade and gathering. That fit the scene perfectly. The man had likely entered the forest to collect plants and sell them later. Jill quietly promised not to waste what he took. Then, he asked the ghost for one thing in return. He needed the direction of the road. The ghost raised an arm and pointed. Jill followed that line with his eyes and found a giant serpent waiting in the dark. It was an evil serpent, the same kind of monster Voss's party had once fought. It drained life from anything it coiled around. The corpse behind him made sense right away. The serpent had likely caught the man near the road and slowly drained him dry. The monster lunged before Jill could step away. Its body wrapped around him and began to tighten, but Jill had already used hardening and body enhancement. The serpent's scales began to glow faintly as it tried to drain his life. Jill answered with a storm skill he had just taken from the dead. Wind blades exploded from his body in every direction. When the storm ended, the evil serpent had been chopped into pieces. Jill looked down at the remains and tested another idea. If he could steal from humans, maybe he could steal from monsters too, and it worked. He gained a skill called Energy Drain. The thought of using it on Voss and the others pleased him more than it should have. If monsters also carried useful power, then the forest around him was no longer just a road. It was a hunting ground. So Jill stayed. He hunted one monster after another. Some monster powers were weak, some were strange or brutally effective. He was no longer a helpless mapper. He was becoming a collector of power who could answer almost any threat with something stolen from the dead. At one point, he killed a bloody bear. From it, he gained another copy of a skill called Mighty Arm that made 200 copies of the same monster skill. Only then did something new happen. The stacked skill evolved into a special skill. That made monster hunting even more valuable. He had hunted so much that the area itself had gone quiet. There was no point staying longer. Now he wanted more from humans. That made his next destination obvious. The royal capital of Glora was large enough to hold more graves than any small town. As soon as he entered the capital, he asked for the main cemetery and headed straight there. Gravestones spread across the land in huge numbers. Digging up every grave was impossible. Most of the dead here would be ordinary people, not fighters. He also felt some resistance to disturbing every grave without purpose. While he stood there thinking, an old man with white hair and a broom approached him. Jill smoothly hid the truth and claimed he had come to pay respects to the dead. The answer pleased the old man, but it also gave Jill something useful. This section held common graves. The graves of adventurers were in another area deeper inside the cemetery. That section even held the tomb of an ancient hero. The moment Jill heard that, his interest sharpened. The hero's tomb stood on raised stone near the back of the cemetery. A large statue rested above it. 2 strong men guarded the entrance. Jill hid in the shadows and studied it from a distance. If the ancient hero's body was really inside, then the skills sleeping there might be stronger than anything he had touched so far. He needed another way in. Jill first used a vision skill he had taken from a bird monster. It let him send his sight high into the air and look down from above. From that view, he confirmed there were no guards behind the tomb. After that, he layered in another skill taken from a bat monster. It used sound too fine for human ears and read the shape of the space it touched. By combining both powers, Jill could make out the inside. A long passage led downward to a single coffin chamber. That was all he needed. He would enter through the earth. For that, he chose Acid Rain. The spell could melt stone, but using it openly would draw attention, so he filled a group of spirits with the magic instead. Their little bodies turned clear, as if full of liquid. Then he sent them to the back wall of the tomb. They clung to the stone and quietly melted it away bit by bit. With so many of them working together, a tunnel formed fast. The tunnel was completely dark, so he placed Fireball into one spirit and let it float ahead like a lamp. A little later, it opened into a small chamber. A stone platform stood in the middle, and on top of it rested a coffin. He stepped toward the coffin and placed a hand on the lid. The moment he touched it, a sharp young voice cut through the silence. Jill spun around at once. A girl was floating near the edge of the room. She was a ghost. The ghost was shocked that Jill could see her. He told her he had been able to see the dead since birth. Instead of recoiling from that power, she praised it. To her, the ability to speak with spirits sounded precious. She even said many restless souls were probably saved just because someone like him could hear them. That reaction caught him off guard. His gift had only brought him fear and disgust for his whole life. Hearing someone admire it so naturally felt strange. When he asked why she was there, she said she was staying beside her own body. Jill looked at the coffin, then back at the red-haired girl, and understood. The ghost in front of him was the ancient hero. The giant warrior statue outside was not her real appearance at all. She explained that the kingdom had turned her into the image people wanted to believe in. Her name was Runa. One thing bothered Jill more than anything else. She had died too young. Runa said that after killing the Demon King, she returned to the capital, joined the victory parade, and attended the celebration at the castle. During the feast, a violent pain hit her. A curse specialist examined her and found a death curse placed on her by the Demon King during the final battle. Nothing could be done. She died the next day. Jill did not hide why he had come. He had broken into the tomb for the hero's skills. He explained that his new power let him steal the skills a dead person carried in life. He expected anger, but Runa accepted it with surprising ease. She was already dead. She could not use those skills anymore. If someone living could use them, she preferred that to letting them rot in a coffin. Then she asked why he wanted so many skills. Jill answered just as plainly. He wanted revenge. He wanted enough power to crush the people who had thrown him into despair. She said his pain was not hers to judge. Then she made one request in return. If he was going to take the hero's power, she wanted him to become the hero in her place. Jill rejected that immediately. He only wanted strength. He had no interest in carrying the world on his back. Runa still pressed the point. She did not believe the Demon King's line was truly gone forever. Sooner or later it would rise again in some form. Jill answered that it already had. Valzard was proof of that. The shock on her face was real. While she had remained trapped in the tomb, the threat she feared had already returned. That only made her more determined. She said that if revenge was what pushed him forward, then he could keep that reason. But while chasing his own enemies, he should also deal with the Demon Kings. Jill still had no interest in becoming a savior, but Runa gave him something harder to ignore. Long ago, she had not fought alone. She had been part of a 4-person hero party. More than 100 years had passed, so the others were surely dead by now. But if Jill was willing to at least consider her request, she would guide him to them. Jill saw the value in that right away. Even if he did not care about the role of hero, the remains of the old hero party could hold skills far beyond normal fighters. He gave her a partial answer. He would think about the rest. In return, she would lead him to the others. Runa assumed that meant she would naturally travel with him. Jill had to explain the problem. She was a bound spirit. The reason her form looked so clear and solid was because she was tied to the tomb and the remains inside it. Spirits like that could not simply wander wherever they wanted. Runa had not understood that all. She had thought she was only trapped because the tomb was sealed from the outside. Jill could free her, but there was a cost. Once he cut the link to the tomb, her existence would become less stable. She might remain as a faint spirit, or she might fade away completely. Runa accepted that risk without hesitation. Staying buried in the tomb meant nothing to her. She wanted to see the world again, even for a short time. That meant she needed an anchor. Jill explained that the best anchor was an object strongly tied to the dead, something worn in life and easy to carry. Runa pointed him toward a simple necklace resting with her remains. When Jill opened the coffin, he found the necklace, cut the spiritual thread linking her to the coffin, and transferred that bond into the crystal hanging from the chain. The moment he slipped it into his pocket, Runa's range moved with it. From then on, she could follow him. Jill then touched her remains with his white hand and checked what the hero had left behind. The result was a shock for a different reason. Runa had only carried one skill in life. It sealed Demon Kings. His disappointment was obvious. Runa did not deny it. She said her old party members had carried most of the other skills. Even with only one skill, she had been born strong enough to fight. That answer did not help much, but it made one thing clear. The real value lay with the rest of her party. Jill already knew her name from the huge letters carved outside the tomb. He finally introduced himself in return. Then he left the tomb with hero Runa drifting beside him. Their next destination was Nurkia. Runa believed one of her companions, the great mage Reiner, had likely been buried there. When the city came into view, Jill had to admit it was beautiful. But the closer he looked, the more wrong it felt. The buildings were fine, the people were not. The streets were busy, yet the faces moving through them looked heavy and tired. Runa was full of open wonder. Everything felt new to her, but when Jill asked where Reinar's grave should be, she could not tell. Too much had changed. Still, one thing looked familiar to her. A church near the square seemed to match the place she remembered. If anyone still knew the old story of Reinar, it would likely be there. Jill pushed open the church door and found trouble waiting inside. An elderly sister was being cornered by two armed men. They wore the same armor and acted like city soldiers. They insisted the church had donation money hidden away for the children living there and demanded she hand it over. They also claimed they were members of the Nurkia Knights and that the city stayed safe only because of them. Runa grew angry at once and wanted to step in. Jill stopped her. There was no point rushing in without understanding the situation. As a spirit, Runa could barely affect the living anyway. Jill had no reason to act before he saw the full picture, so he watched. The sister kept refusing. She said there was no money to give. She also tried to keep the children from growing afraid. One of the men only laughed and said frightened orphans disappearing from the place would not be a bad thing. Then he noticed her reaction to a nearby desk and walked over. When she rushed to stop him, he shoved her to the floor. He found a leather pouch in the drawer and checked the contents. Gold coins shone in his hand. The sister begged him to stop and said the money was meant to feed the children that month. The men did not care. They kicked her aside and stepped on her hand to silence her. That sight pulled Jill straight back to the cliff. He remembered Voss grinding his heel into Jill's fingers while he hung over the abyss. That was enough. He stepped fully into the room and stopped in front of them. He had come there for one reason. He wanted to know where the grave of the ancient mage, Reinar, could be found. The two men knew nothing. One noticed Jill was not from the city and changed tactics at once. They claimed outsiders had to pay an entry tax in Nurkia. Jill saw through the lie immediately. A real tax would never be collected like that. When he refused to play along, both men drew their swords and decided to take what they wanted by force. Jill used the chance to test himself against humans. The first man came at him with clean, practiced sword work. Jill read the movement and dodged by the smallest margin. The man was stunned, then immediately turned the first slash into a second with a follow-up strike skill. Since Jill had stolen the same kind of skill from many dead swordsmen, he slipped past that strike as well. Then the other soldier joined in. The two attacked together and tried to overwhelm him. Jill stopped dodging. He strengthened his left arm and caught one sword barehanded. His right arm, already strengthened by Veldor, caught the second. Both soldiers froze. Then Jill used a vibration skill. Both swords burst apart in his hands. The soldiers instantly dropped their bold act. They called it a misunderstanding, put the stolen money down, and ran. Jill let them go. Runa stared at him in open shock. She had just watched him use several advanced skills in a single fight, and she understood how abnormal that really was. When he explained that some of them had come from monsters, Runa was stunned all over again. The elderly sister finally recovered enough to thank him. Her name was Hana, and she ran the orphanage inside the church. Jill asked about Reinar again. Hana said Reinar had indeed been from Nurkia, and his grave had once stood in the central plaza. Jill looked back outside at the rubble and understood. That broken structure, it had been Reinar's grave. Hana said the new lord of Nurkia had ordered it torn down. He claimed some ancient dead man could no longer stand as the symbol of the city. In its place, he wanted to raise a statue of himself. That alone was offensive enough, but the next part cut deeper. The new lord had not been some random noble. He was one of the men who claimed to have defeated Valzard. Hana gave the name. It's Dane. Jill went completely still. He would never forget that man. Dane's smile, while kicking him into Swandal, was burned into his memory. Hana added that Dane had been rewarded by the king after Valzard's fall, given a noble title, and placed in charge of Nurkia about a year earlier. Only then did another truth hit Jill. He had spent an entire year inside the Great Forest after escaping the Swandal. He had hunted monsters, stolen skills, and grown stronger for so long that he stopped noticing the passing of time. While he was buried in the wild, Dane had risen into wealth and power. Jill left the church and headed straight for the rubble in the plaza. Runa quickly understood what was on his mind. She quietly asked whether the new Lord Hana mentioned was one of the people who betrayed him. Jill confirmed it at once. Together they searched the broken stone until they found the coffin near the center. The lid had already been opened. The inside was empty. If someone had destroyed the grave out of simple disrespect, the bones should have been smashed and left there with everything else. Instead, not even a fragment remained. That meant the remains had been removed on purpose. That person had to be Dane. this was also the perfect chance for revenge. He had already gathered enough power to face him. More than that, he knew Dane well. They had once traveled together. He knew the man's habits in battle. He knew the kind of power Dane relied on. First, he needed to find him. Jill lifted his eyes to the castle on the hill. Runa asked if he planned to investigate. He said yes. She insisted on coming. So without wasting another moment, they turned toward the castle. That night, Jill and Runa moved toward the castle on the hill. He avoided the front gate and circled to the rear instead. The back wall was high, smooth, and almost impossible to climb. That was exactly why he chose it. A place that looked impossible to cross rarely got much attention. Runa asked how he planned to get in. Jill gave the simplest answer possible. He strengthened both legs, bent once, and jumped. He cleared the wall in a single leap. Runa floated up after him and stared in shock. Even in her age, a jump like that would have looked absurd. Jill crouched in the shadow of the wall and studied the grounds. Watchtowers stood apart on either side. The main residence sat between them. He moved from the wall to a side tower, from the tower to a lower roof, then across several rooftops until he reached a terrace halfway up the residence. There he used one of his scanning skills, and a rough layout of the inside appeared. A hidden staircase ran from the upper floor down into the ground. That kind of passage was usually meant for the escape of someone important, which meant the room above it was likely Dane's. Jill climbed higher and looked through a window. Inside the room stood 3 people. One was the night captain, one was a frightened young woman from the town, the third was Dane. Jill recognized him instantly. A year had passed, but nothing important had changed. Dane still carried the same smug face and the same confidence he had worn at Swandle. Jill sharpened his hearing and listened. The night captain was reporting on collections. Most had gone well. A few households still could not pay, so he had brought the usual substitute, the girl. Dane looked her over like property. The captain proudly explained the system they had been using. Families short on coin could hand over a pretty daughter instead. They called it a beauty tax. Dane approved of it without the slightest pause. The girl tried to resist. Dane pressed harder. He spoke of comfort, rich clothes, good food, and an easy life, but the meaning under it was rotten. He wanted to own her. She said someone was already waiting for her, a man she had promised herself to. Dane brushed that aside and made it clear he could arrest that man the next morning under any charge he pleased. From there, the rest would be easy. The color drained from Runa's face. Jill's eyes turned cold. After a while, Dane dismissed the night captain. The moment the man left, Dane locked the door behind him. The girl understood the danger right away. She backed away with trembling steps until the bed stopped her. Dane followed at a slow, relaxed pace, certain he was in complete control. Runa urged Jill to move, but he could not enter through that window. A spirit could slip through them. A living man could not, so he gave Runa a job. She was to pass through the wall, enter the room, and unlock the door from inside. Jill dropped to the next window and landed in a curved corridor outside Dane's room. 2 guards stood by the door. He already knew how to deal with them. During his year in the forest, he had taken a sleep skill from goblin shamans so many times that it had changed into something much worse. It no longer only forced sleep, it dragged the target into a chosen nightmare. He walked toward the guards without hiding. For a second they hesitated, trying to place him. Then suspicion rose. The nightmare skill reached both of them first. Their eyes rolled back and they collapsed without a sound. Jill stepped over them and stopped before the door. A moment later, a soft click came from inside. Runa had opened it. Before entering, Jill added one more layer to the plan. A silent barrier spread over the entire room. From that point on, any sound or scream made inside would die there. Then he opened the door and stepped in. Dane turned right away. At first, he clearly thought a guard had entered without permission. Then the light touched Jill's face, and everything in Dane's expression froze. He had believed Jill was dead. The shock lasted only a moment. After that, contempt returned. He mocked Jill for surviving the Swandle and treated the whole scene like a strange joke. Then his attitude shifted again. He tried warmth. He acted like an old comrade, meeting someone who had gotten lucky. He reached for a bottle, as if the two of them could sit and drink. When that failed, he pointed toward the girl on the bed and acted as though he could offer her instead. Jill ignored all of it. He had not come there for wine, excuses, or a staged reunion. He asked about Reinar's grave. Dane did not deny anything. He admitted that he had ordered the grave torn down. He admitted that the bones inside had been taken away. He had done it because Reinar still held meaning in Nurkia. Even after all those years, the old name could still become a symbol if the people ever turned restless enough. Dane wanted no symbol in the city except himself. That was why he planned to raise his own statue where Reinar's grave once stood. Removing the structure had not been enough. The bones had to disappear too. Then Jill asked where those bones had gone. Dane said he had them thrown into Lake Lucan near Mount Ragna in the south. Jill said nothing for a moment. Then he told Dane the second reason he had come: revenge. Dane burst out laughing. To him, the old Jill had never been more than a spirit-talking tool. The idea that this same man had returned to claim revenge was ridiculous. He said Voss and the others would reach the same answer if they learned Jill was still alive. They would kill him. Even so, Dane was happy to handle the matter himself. He spread one hand and invited Jill to attack from anywhere. Jill already knew what kind of enemy stood before him. Dane had only 3 skills. One was axe mastery at a level so high that very few men in the kingdom could match it. Another was advanced body enhancement. The third was the real problem. It erased physical attacks aimed at him. That special defense had made Dane the shield of Voss's party. It was one of the main reasons they had been able to stand before a demon king at all. Dane moved first. He still looked down on Jill enough to start barehanded. His punch tore through the air with brutal force. Jill layered several support skills over his body at once and slipped past it by the narrowest margin. Dane followed with more strikes. Jill avoided them all. Dane immediately understood something was wrong. He poured body enhancement into his arm and came again, harder and faster. This time, Jill met him head-on and caught Dane's fist with his bare hand. That was the moment the room changed. Until then, Dane had still been holding on to the idea that Jill's return was some strange accident. That grip shattered it. He tore his arm free and dropped all pretense. The look on his face became the same one Jill remembered from real battles, calm, sharp, and serious. Then, Dane called for his true weapon. A tear opened in the air itself. He reached into that hidden space and pulled out a massive, dark battle axe, far larger than any normal man should have been able to handle so easily. Jill knew that axe well. Dane had taken it long ago after bringing down a dark fighter from the demon realm. Dane came in again. The axe moved with impossible speed, chaining one strike into the next without leaving any gap. Jill threw himself fully into evasion. He sharpened his reading of movement, strengthened his body, and pushed his speed higher, but the pressure kept tightening. Dane mastery was too refined. Every swing landed where Jill would need to go next. The axe itself greatly boosted Dane's physical power. It was not only a weapon, it was an amplifier. Jill knew he could not keep dodging forever. The next time the axe came down, he raised his right arm. The white arm caught the blade. Dane stared in disbelief. Before Dane could recover, Jill used the same vibration skill that had shattered the soldiers' swords in the church. The weapon burst apart in Dane's hands. For the first time that night, Dane looked truly shaken. Jill moved right then. He pulled back his right fist. Dane still believed in his special defense. That skill erased physical attacks, so under normal conditions a punch would mean nothing to him. But Jill had already thought beyond that. He wrapped fire around his white fist and drove it forward. Dane realized the danger too late. His special defense could erase physical force. It could not erase magic. At point-blank distance, there was no room left. Jill's burning fist crashed into his stomach. Fire burst through Dane's guard and covered him in flame. He screamed as the blast tore through his clothes and scorched his body. When the fire died down, his huge frame hit the floor in a smoking heap, but he was still alive. That did not disappoint Jill. It pleased him. He had not come all this way for a quick death. Dane tried to turn the situation around one more time. He laughed through the pain and said the fight had been too loud. By now, the guards should be on their way. Jill calmly told him the truth. Nothing from this room had escaped. Sound, impact, and fire had all died inside the barrier before they could reach the hall. The fear that crossed Dane's face after that was real. He instantly changed again and started begging. He blamed Voss. He claimed the betrayal at the gorge had only happened because he was pressured into it. He even tried to excuse the smile he wore that day by saying he had simply been born with that kind of face. Jill did not bother arguing. He answered with a small burst of lightning beside Dane's face. The flash cracked through the room and made Dane flinch so hard he nearly fell over. Then Jill asked the only question that mattered. If he had begged for his life back then, would Dane have spared him? Dane said nothing. That silence gave Jill all the answer he needed. Then he told him the truth. Leaving him alive would only mean more ruined people, more fear, and more deaths. Men like Dane did not stop on their own. That finally shattered Dane's nerve. He backed toward the wall, as far as his injured body could manage, and started begging again. He promised anything. He said he would do whatever Jill wanted as long as he was spared. Jill ignored the offer and asked a different question. He wanted to know where Reiner's bones had been thrown. Dane answered quickly that the remains had been dumped in Lake Lucan, near Mount Ragna in the south. The place was surrounded by deep forest and hard to search. That only made Jill more irritated. While Jill was still thinking about the lake, Dane suddenly lunged toward the bed. He grabbed the young woman with one arm and locked his other hand around her neck. Then his face twisted into ugly triumph. He shouted for Jill to remove the barrier at once. Otherwise, he would crush the girl's neck. Jill did not panic. He gave Dane a small round of applause instead. That reaction only confused him, but to Jill, it was useful. Dane had just proved exactly what kind of man he was. There was no room left for even the smallest hesitation. The next second, cold air cut through the room. 2 ice spears flashed out and pierced both of Dane's shoulders. The effect was immediate. His arms dropped at once. All strength left them, and the girl broke free and crawled across the floor in shock. Dane stared at his own useless arms and realized the nerves had been ruined. Jill quietly said that, looking back, he should have crippled those arms from the start. He raised his right hand again. Fire gathered around it. He told Dane that the earlier strike had only burned the outside. This time, he would burn him properly, from the inside. Then he promised him something even worse. Death would not end everything. The world beyond death was real, and Dane already knew that from watching Jill for so many years. But in Dane's case, Jill would not even allow the normal path of a soul. He would lead leave him behind as a low-grade spirit, tied forever to the world he feared. The color drained from Dane's face. He tried to beg one last time. Jill punched before he could finish. His burning fist drove into Dane's stomach, but that alone was not enough. Jill added the crushing force he had taken from countless bloody bears and drove the attack deeper. When his fist reached the center of Dane's body, he released the fire. Dane's whole body erupted in flames. The scream that followed no longer sounded human. It filled the room like the cry of a trapped beast. Little by little, the flames narrowed and died away. When it was over, only a blackened mass remained on the floor. Jill stood over it in silence, one down. There was satisfaction in it, but it did not fill him the way he once thought it would. Something still remained unfinished inside him. He crouched and placed his white hand on the remains. The skills came at once. He took Dane's Supreme Axe skill, Advanced Body Enhancement, and the special defense that erased physical attacks. Those were exactly the powers he expected. All of them had helped carry Dane to the point of standing beside a Demon King. The special defense mattered most. With that power in his hands, physical attacks would now mean almost nothing to him. Then another change followed. His own axe skill rose past its old limit. His body enhancement did too. He had reached a rank beyond what the world was supposed to have. A moment later, a new bonus skill appeared as well, one tied to the dark axe Dane had carried. Jill did not fully understand its value yet, but he could tell it was no small thing. When he finally looked up, Runa and the rescued girl were both staring at him. Runa rushed forward in relief, tried to throw herself at him, and passed straight through his body. She turned back with an embarrassed face, then smiled, and told him he had done it. Jill had not expected that reaction to matter, but it did. It eased something inside him. A moment later, she asked about the threat he made before the final strike. She wanted to know what becoming a weak spirit really meant. Jill explained it quietly. Most people did not become strong ghosts after death. Usually, the dead turned into low, faint spirits, with almost no thought left in them. After a while, they were purified and passed on. But if someone like Jill tied one of those weak spirits to a place with spirit threads, the result changed. It would stay there pointlessly, unable to move on, unable to truly think, and unable to find any peace. An endless prison with no meaning. Runa visibly shivered. Then she wondered whether Dane might still become something on his own through regret or attachment. Jill shook his head. That kind of binding needed strong, unfinished feelings. Dane had not died with regret. He had died in fear. The girl, who could not see Runa at all, finally asked the same question Jill had heard his whole life. Who was he talking to? He gave the same answer as always, himself. Jill tried to cut the gratitude short. He told her that he had not stepped in out of kindness. He had only come there because he already had a personal grudge against Dane. She still insisted that he had saved her. More than that, she said he had saved Nurkia too. The city had wanted Dane gone for a long time, but no one could stand against the power he controlled. Even speaking openly against him had become dangerous. While she spoke, Jill noticed the damage left on her face. Her cheek was badly swollen, and the injury near her mouth still looked painful. He quietly admitted that he had no healing skill. To his surprise, she worried about him instead. She had seen the damage to his clothes and offered to repair them. She said sewing was one of the few things she was truly good at. Jill had not expected anyone to focus on that, especially after seeing his exposed white arm. Jill asked if she was not afraid of what she had seen. She answered honestly, no, that arm had saved her. There was nothing frightening in that, Runa added with bright approval that the arm looked cool. Jill ignored that and turned back to the real problem. They could not stay there. A dead lord would throw the castle into chaos. Soldiers would soon flood the place. Runa raised the obvious concern. Even if they escaped cleanly, the city would still lock down once the body was found. Jill had already planned for that. The two guards outside the room were still under the nightmare skill. Before putting them to sleep, he had planted the same false memory in both men. In that dream, Dane had been crushed by guilt over his own actions and burned himself to death with lamp oil. When they woke and found the body, dream and reality would blur together. Since both of them would remember the same scene, others would either believe the story or at least suspect those guards before imagining an outside killer. He ended the talk there. It was time to move. When the young woman asked how, Jill did not answer with words. He simply stepped forward, caught her around the waist, and lifted her onto his shoulder. She let out a startled sound. Jill signaled Runa, ran to the far window at the end of the hall, planted one foot on the frame, strengthened his legs, and jumped into the night. The girl did not even finish her scream. She fainted before the fall truly began. By dawn, Jill and Runa had already left Nurkia and were heading south. Jill took her back home before leaving the city. He did not think suspicion would fall on her. Dane was huge, she was not, and the two guards outside the room would wake with the same false memory of their lord burning himself to death. By then, the castle should already be drowning in confusion. Their next destination was Lake Lucan near Mount Ragna, the place where Dane said Reinar's bones had been thrown. A large road ran through the foothills, so the route itself was simple. The real problem waited around the lake. The woods there were thick, the view was poor, and the place was known for swallowing travelers in heavy fog. Jill had once lived as a mapper, so he did not fear getting lost easily. Runa was in a bright mood during the trip. She had spent more than 100 years trapped in a tomb, and now everything felt new to her. But two things still frustrated her. She could not eat, no matter how good the food smelled, and she could not hold on to Jill even when she wanted to. Jill avoided that second problem by asking whether she had ever been near Lake Lucan before. Runa remembered something important right away. Long ago, her party had killed a fire dragon there. If the remains were still around, Jill might be able to take power from that too. After several more days on the road, they finally reached the lake. It sat deep in the forest at the foot of Mount Ragna. The water was clear. For a moment, the place looked too peaceful to hide bones and dragons. Then he turned to the real work. Jill called for spirits. More than 30 rose around the shore at once. Runa was delighted. She called them cute, and the spirits seemed to like her just as much. They gathered on her shoulders, hands, until she looked half buried under soft white fluff. Jill had never seen them react to anyone like that. Once the moment passed, he explained that if Dane's men had really dumped Reinar's remains here, then the spirits living around the lake had a good chance of seeing it happen. That meant they could search by memory. The spirits understood enough. They all dove into the water. The answer came back almost immediately. One spirit called to him from a point near the shore. The bones had not been thrown far out, and no strong current had carried them away. Jill thanked the spirits and was about to move when Runa looked around and realized the obvious problem. The spirits could find the bones, but they could not lift them. Jill looked at her with a small smile. She understood a second later. He was not sending the spirits into the water, he was sending her. Runa panicked at first. Even if she had hands, she normally could not touch anything solid for long. Jill answered that he had already thought of that. He used magic enchantment on her and placed blast around her spirit body. Wind wrapped around her like a thin shell. The idea was simple. If that wind stayed close enough to her form, it might let her push against objects underwater even if her own body normally passed through them. Runa still looked stunned, but the plan was good enough to try. She jumped into the lake without wasting more time. Jill expected a wait. Instead, she returned almost at once. She rose from the water holding a skull in both hands. It was almost certainly Reinar's. The rest of the bones had either broken down too much or scattered over time, but the skull had remained. Jill took it and placed his white hand on it. A large set of skills appeared before his eyes. Jill gained a full line of earth magic, from basic control over sand and stone to a supreme spell powerful enough to call down destruction like a falling star. He also gained supreme magic enchantment and one more special skill besides. The result was so useful that even Jill could not hide a dark smile. Runa saw that smile and understood that Reinar had left behind something valuable. That alone made her happy. Jill asked what should be done with the skull now. The best answer would have been to return it to Nurkia, but the city would be too unstable for a while after Dane's death. Runa suggested a temporary grave on a nearby hill. Reinar had loved high places and wide views, so she thought that would suit him. Jill agreed. He picked up the skull, and the two of them started toward the hill. Before they got far, a man's scream tore through the forest. Jill and Runa moved at once. The fog had thickened by then, and the trees blocked most of the view, but the sound led them true. A little later, they found two young militiamen standing in terror. Their gear was poor. Their hands were shaking. In front of them stood a huge shape with burning red scales, claws, and wings. It was a fire dragon. Jill looked at Runa and reminded her that she once said her party had killed one here long ago. Runa said that part was true, but this was not the same dragon. It was likely the child of the one her party had slain. The egg must have been missed. The dragon noticed them and attacked right away. He barely avoided it. The fire blackened trees and burned the ground where he had just been standing. Jill answered with his strongest water magic, shaping it into a violent whirlpool around the dragon's body. The spell started to form, then vanished into steam before it could fully take hold. Jill rushed between the two militiamen, grabbed both of their swords, and leaped for the dragon's neck. The dragon answered with its tail. One sword broke apart on contact, even after Jill hardened it. He landed, reset his footing, and threw the second sword first. The dragon knocked it aside without thinking. That small movement opened the line he needed. Jill jumped again. This time he used the new bonus skill he had gained from Dane. A massive dark axe appeared from another space. He caught it in midair and brought it down in one clean strike. The blade cut through the dragon's scales and neck in a single blow. The young fire dragon died before it could even roar. Jill walked to the corpse and placed his white hand on it. He gained one skill, fire breath. There was no doubt it was powerful. He had nearly been burned alive by it moments earlier. The image of breathing fire from his own mouth like a beast did not please him at all. He decided to keep that skill in reserve unless he truly needed it. The militiamen dropped to the ground in gratitude and thanked him for saving their lives. Jill asked why they had come this far into the forest in the first place. They explained that they had been on the road to Nurkia when the fog swallowed the path and pulled them off course. Then they ran straight into the dragon. Jill pointed them back toward the real road and told them to follow the marks he had carved into the trees on the way in. After that, he and Runa climbed the nearby hill to bury Reinar. The place had a fine view. Fog drifted below them and spread across the ground like a pale sea. Jill thought it was a good temporary resting place, so he set Reinar's skull down and reached toward the soil to dig with magic. The moment his hand touched the earth, a new skill appeared before his eyes. Draconic Blaze. Jill froze. He had only touched the ground. That alone should not have given him anything, which meant the hill itself was the corpse. He looked over the shape again, and the answer became clear. One long stretch could have been the neck. Another could have been the tail. Part of an old buried bone even pushed through the dirt nearby. This hill was the remains of the old fire dragon Runa's party had killed more than 100 years earlier. He asked if they should choose another place for Reinar. Runa said no. The reason stayed the same. Reinar would have liked the height and the view. On top of that, she thought it suited him to rest on a dragon they once defeated. Jill let that pass. He buried Reinar's skull there, raised a simple marker from fallen wood, and finished the temporary grave. The new skill he had gained, Draconic Blaze, was basically a stronger form of fire breath. That did not make it any less strange in his eyes. It still meant breathing flames from his own mouth. He pushed that thought aside and started down the hill with Runa. The two militiamen returned before they got far. This time they had a request. They were from the town of Horus in the Arkham region. Young women had been disappearing there at night. No one had seen the culprit. Because of that, they feared something tied to ghosts, spirits, or some other hidden force. They had been on their way to Nurkia to hire adventurers when the fog pulled them off the road. Now that they had seen Jill speak to empty air and kill a dragon with one blow, they believed he might be the only one who could handle whatever was behind the disappearances. Jill refused at first. He was not wandering the land to take requests from strangers. The militia kept pleading. They offered money, food, and a place to stay. They begged him to at least meet the head of Horus before deciding. Jill was ready to name some impossible price just to make them stop. Then one of them mentioned the leader's name, Juri Thoris. The moment he heard it, his whole face changed. The memory of the cliff came back at once. Juri's smile, the lightning, his hand breaking loose from the rock. The militiaman repeated the name, and the answer stayed the same. Juri Thoris was the head of Horus. Jill accepted the request on the spot. The militia were too relieved to question the sudden change. They thanked him again and again. Jill barely heard them. He was already smiling for a very different reason. Horus sat in one corner of the Arkham region, the land that had suffered the worst damage from Valzard's monsters. Even so, the town Jill entered did not look broken anymore. The roads were steady, the houses were repaired, children played outside, and the adults looked calm. According to the two militiamen, that recovery had happened because of Juri. After Valzard's fall, every member of Voss's party had been offered land and status by the king. Juri alone had refused the larger reward and chosen Horus instead. She became its leader and threw herself into rebuilding the town. The people now trusted her almost like a saint. Jill did not believe that for even a moment. He could still see her face over the cliff. He could still remember the smile she wore when she destroyed the rock under his hand. A woman like that did not become pure just because a town called her kind. This only meant one thing. She was hiding behind a perfect mask. He intended to stay close enough to tear it off. The militia led him to Juri's house. It stood a little away from the center of town. It was large enough for a leader, but not flashy. That looked deliberate too. The place gave the image of someone modest and selfless. When Jill stepped inside, he saw her at once. A full year had passed since Swandle, yet almost nothing about her had changed. She still had the same beauty. She still had the same calm presence. Only Jill knew how false that softness really was. She recognized him immediately. For someone looking at a man she had tried to kill, her reaction was strangely light. She sent the militia away and lowered her head as soon as they were gone. Tears came quickly. She said Voss had deceived her. Jill listened without showing anything on his face. Then she brought up Stella. Jill remembered Stella clearly. She had once traveled with the party too. She was Juri's twin sister. Unlike Juri, Stella had been quiet and gentle, but she had fallen seriously ill and left the group. Jill never knew what truly happened to her. Juri now claimed Voss had filled her head with lies. He told her Stella's sickness was Jill's fault. He said a spirit had attached itself to Stella because of Jill's connection to the dead and was draining her life away. According to that story, the only way to save Stella was to kill the source. That source was Jill. Jill did not believe it. Even if Juri had truly been desperate for her sister, the excuse was still pathetic. Either she had been stupid enough to fall for it, or she was lying again right in front of him. Neither answer gave him any reason to trust her. She admitted that her actions could not be undone. She said rebuilding Horus was only the first step in trying to become someone better. She asked him to stay, watch her honestly, and see the person she had become. Jill had no interest in any of that. Still, he had already decided to take the job. If Juri was lying, the truth would show itself sooner or later. A maid appeared and led him to a room. Jill said nothing else. He only fixed one thought in his mind. He would stay in Horus, handle the disappearance case, and watch until the saintly mask came out. The moment he entered the room and the door closed, Runa made her opinion clear. She hated Juri. Jill lay back on the bed and admitted that her instincts were right for once. To Runa, no tears and no kind expression could erase what Juri had done at the Swandal. Jill found himself strangely glad to hear it. Most people living peaceful lives would reject revenge from the start. Runa never had. From the day they met, she had always accepted his hatred instead of lecturing him about it. That made Jill wonder again why she understood him so easily. He thought about the reason she had remained in the world after death. She said it was because she could not leave while the threat of the Demon King still lingered. Jill had believed that. But now he felt that was only part of the truth, so he asked her directly if that was really the only thing holding her there. Runa hesitated. That small pause told him enough. After a moment, she admitted it. Duty was not the only thing she carried. Hatred was there too. Jill looked at her more carefully. She had always seemed bright, open, and almost too easy to smile. Hatred did not fit that image at all. Runa then told him the real story of her death. After the victory feast at the royal castle, a servant dressed in black had offered her a drink. She accepted it without suspicion. Soon after that, her vision blurred, her breathing became difficult, and her body stopped obeying her. At first, she thought the drink had simply hit her too hard. Then she realized something was very wrong. By the time she understood it, she could barely move. Later, she learned the truth. The drink had been poisoned. Jill felt cold anger rise inside him as she kept going. Runa said the kingdom likely saw her as a threat after the war. A hero powerful enough to kill a demon king was useful during a crisis. After the crisis, that same power became dangerous. If someone like her ever turned away from the throne or supported another side, the kingdom itself could be shaken. So the safest answer had been to remove her quietly and tell the world a cleaner story. The public got a noble lie about a death curse from the Demon King. The truth was much uglier. Jill listened in silence. None of it felt distant to him. It felt familiar. A person used when convenient, then discarded when no longer useful. Runa tried to make light of it. She said dying to poison after all her victories was not exactly a proud ending for a hero. The smile she wore while saying it looked thin and forced. Jill asked the question that mattered. Did she want revenge? Runa could not answer cleanly. The people who had betrayed her were already long dead. The current king was not the one who did it. Striking the kingdom now would only punish people who had nothing to do with it. She knew that. Still, the betrayal itself had never left her. In the end, she said she could only remain as she was. But the people suffering under the revived demon kings had nothing to do with her private pain. That was why she still wanted to help them. Runa pushed him again to take over her role one day. She said if he did, she might finally be able to leave this world in peace. Jill avoided that pressure the same way he always did. He pulled the blanket up, turned away, and said he was done talking for the night. Runa complained that it was unfair for him to sleep when she could not. Jill answered that this was exactly why he planned to rest while he still could. Runa hovered there with an unhappy face while he closed his eyes. Later that night, Runa drifted into a memory that still felt too close to her. She remembered waking on a hard, cold surface in a dark room. Her body felt heavy, her stomach twisted, and even breathing hurt. At first, she did not know where she was, but then she remembered the celebration, the drink. One belonged to the King of Glora, the other belonged to a younger man. That man calmly explained that the poison had been mixed with curse magic, had no taste or smell, and had been used in a dose large enough to kill even a hero. That was the moment Runa fully understood what had happened to her. The king leaned over her and quietly said it was for the good of the country. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to ask what all her fighting had meant. Her body no longer let her speak. She saw the other man, clearly enough to burn him into memory. He was young and wore black, with sharp ears, pale skin, and cold golden eyes. He looked at her as if he were almost laughing. He was the one who had handed her the drink. That was the face she wanted to remember more than anything else before death took her. The memory broke there. Runa returned to the present with a jolt. Jill was asleep nearby. The room was still. Then she noticed something far more frightening than the memory itself. Her hands were fading. From the fingertips to the wrists, they were turning thin and almost see-through before returning to normal again. It happened in a slow, uneven flicker. The moment she saw it, she understood what it likely meant. Her existence was beginning to weaken. A small sound escaped her before she could stop it. Jill woke at once. He looked toward her and asked what had happened. Runa quickly hid both hands behind her back and forced a smile. She claimed it was nothing. The excuse sounded weak, even to her own ears. Jill looked at her face and understood right away that she was hiding something. Before he could press her further, someone knocked on the door. Jill first thought it might be the maid, but when he opened it, Juri was standing there. It was deep into the night. She asked to come in. Juri stood at the door in the middle of the night. She apologized for coming so late and asked for a little time. Jill had nothing he wanted to say to her, but he also had no reason to turn her away. He sat on the bed and waited. Juri did not speak right away. Instead, she brought up an old memory. Back when the party still traveled together, the two of them had once been separated from the others in Denez Forest and were forced to survive there alone until morning. Jill remembered it clearly. The forest had been soaked in evil energy. Spirits would not go near it. His usual way of scouting had become useless, and the monsters that moved there at night were too dangerous to fight head-on. So he and Juri had hidden and waited for daylight. They had not said much that night. Even so, the silence between them had not been empty. They sat side by side on a fallen tree and waited for sunrise, both of them knowing there were feelings there, yet neither willing to cross the line first. Juri said that night had stayed precious to her. She said the feeling she carried then had never changed. As she spoke, she moved closer. Her golden hair brushed his shoulder. Her voice softened. Her eyes filled with a sadness. She leaned toward him, as if trying to return to a moment that had already died. Runa, watching from nearby, looked completely shaken. Juri's face came close enough for their breath to meet. Jill pushed her away. For a moment, real surprise crossed her face. Then that too changed. She quickly turned it into a wounded look and framed the whole thing as her final confession, the last truth she wanted to place before him before giving up. She thanked him for listening and left the room with a sad smile. Jill watched the door close and felt nothing soften inside him. To him, the whole scene had felt staged from beginning to end. The next morning, he began the investigation into the disappearances in Horus. Runa came with him, though she said nothing about Juri's visit. Jill noticed that and understood why. She was trying not to make things worse. By midday, they reached the central square. Then Jill stepped into the shade of a tree and leaned against the trunk. Runa could not believe what she was seeing. From her point of view, he had done nothing all morning. There was no questioning, no searching, and no visible effort at all. Jill answered that he had already started. A moment later, familiar voices drifted in from all sides. The spirits returned. They came floating through the air like bits of white fluff, riding the wind until they gathered around him. Runa understood. Jill had sent them out during the night while everyone else slept. The little spirits crowded around her too, just as they always did. Then Jill explained the plan. The last abduction had happened 3 days earlier. If a ghost or spirit had caused it, some kind of lingering spiritual trace should still remain somewhere in town. That was what he sent the spirits to search for. The answer was no. There was no spiritual trace at all. That meant the culprit was not a ghost. Then one of the spirits added something else. It had found the residue of magic belonging to a monster. That changed the whole case at once. If monster magic had entered the town without causing panic, then the culprit was not some simple beast. A normal monster would have been seen immediately. This kind of stealth suggested something smarter and much more dangerous. Jill came to one answer. The likely culprit was an upper demon. Runa went pale the moment she heard that. An upper demon was not a wandering beast or some stray threat. It was the kind of being that stood close to demon kings and moved with real purpose. Even Jill had to admit the case had become worse than expected. Still, the spirits had found a trail. That meant he had something real to follow. They moved through town with the spirits leading the way. Starting from one of the girls' homes, the demonic residue stretched onward like a stain left behind in the air. Jill followed it through the streets and out toward the edge of Horus. The trail led to an old abandoned mine hidden in a rocky slope. Broken boards still clung to the entrance. The place had clearly been sealed off long ago, but the residue went straight inside. The moment Jill looked into the dark opening, a bad feeling pressed into his chest. His instincts told him there was something important waiting below. If it became too dangerous, he would retreat at once. Until then, he would keep moving. Runa understood without needing many words. She nodded, and together they entered the mine. The air inside was cold. The tunnel sloped down into the earth. Jill placed fireball into several spirits and used them as floating lights, but even that only pushed the darkness back so far. The deeper they went, the wider the mine became. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. Runa noticed the shapes first. Something was hanging from the wall ahead. Jill brightened the chamber with more light. Then both of them stopped. The walls were covered in corpses. They had dried down to skin and bone. Each one was hanging from a hook. A room built from cruelty and vanity. Runa covered her mouth in horror. Jill stared in silence. The sight alone told him this was the true source of the disappearances. He had only just started wondering why anyone would create something so vile when a voice rose from the darkness deeper in the mine. It looked calm, almost pleased. A woman stepped out of the dark and into the firelight. It was Juri. She looked at Jill with a smile and welcomed him to her dressing room. Jill looked at Juri and saw her real face at last. She did not bother denying anything. The night before had been his last chance. If he had accepted her then, she would have kept him beside her as something useful, a servant, a pet, a man, tied to her for the rest of his life. Since he rejected her, she had no reason to keep pretending. He glanced at the dead women hanging around the chamber and asked if this horror was hers too. She admitted it without shame. Those girls were the source of her beauty. She could drain the life force from beautiful young women and absorb it into herself. That let her stay young and lovely without end. To her, beauty was power. Men saw a beautiful woman, lowered their guard, and started moving for her before they even understood what they were doing. That was why Horus suited her so well. It was a small town. A few kind acts were enough to make the people trust her. After that, they would accept almost anything. The girls she disliked or envied simply vanished and became fuel for her body. That answer disgusted him, but the next truth was even worse. Jury said Stella had never been ruined by illness. She had done that herself. Stella shared the same face, yet in Jury's eyes, she looked even better. That alone made her impossible to endure, so she poisoned her own twin. The poison damaged Stella badly, but it did not kill her the way Jury wanted. A ruined body was not enough. Jury wanted her gone completely, so she locked Stella inside a coffin and left her there until hunger finished the rest. Then she flicked her hand and blasted open a rough wooden coffin standing near the wall. Stella lay inside. Her body was painfully thin, but her face was still clear enough to recognize at once. It was Jury's face, and not Jury's face at the same time. Her skin had kept a pale, eerie beauty even in death. The ropes in the coffin made it obvious how she had been treated in her final days. Jill understood one more thing. Stella had used light magic in life. In rare cases, traces of that power remained in the body even after death and slowed decay. Jury hated that most of all. Even after everything she did, Stella's beauty had not vanished the way she wanted. That only deepened her spite. Jill forced his eyes away from the coffin and asked the question that mattered now. He wanted to know where Jury got the power to steal life in the first place. Another voice answered before she could. A young man stepped out of the darkness behind her. He wore formal black clothes. The pressure around him confirmed what the demonic trace in the town had already suggested. He was an upper demon. Jill understood at once that this was the true source hiding behind Horus. Runa stopped moving. Jill only needed one look at her face to understand that something else was wrong. The demon's eyes shifted toward her, and he saw her clearly. That alone was strange enough. Most living humans could not see her at all. After a short pause, recognition appeared in his face. He identified her without hesitation as the hero who had been poisoned and abandoned. Jill asked if this was the man from the memory she carried to her death. Runa slowly nodded. She had only been half conscious back then, but now that she was seeing him directly, she was certain he was the one who gave her the poisoned drink. He was the one who stood beside the king and watched her die. The demon introduced himself as Gaster. He said he had once served the old demon king. His tone stayed calm and almost refined. Jill had no interest in his manners. The man in front of him had helped murder Runa. That alone was enough, he asked. Why would a demon give power to a human like Jury? Gaster answered that the reason was simple. They wanted the same things. Jury wanted beauty, control, and an easy way to bend a town to her will. The demons wanted influence inside human lands. Their interests matched. Jury was not the only one tied to them. Voss and the others had made the same kind of deal. He explained the arrangement began when the Voss's party entered Duquesne, the land ruled by Valzard. Hearing that, Jill understood why everything about them had felt wrong even before the betrayal at the Swandle. There really had been something rotten inside the group long before they tried to erase him. Then Gaster revealed the ugliest part of it all. Valzard had never truly died. The victory the kingdom celebrated was a lie from the start. Valzard's greatest weakness had been relying too much on raw power. Before losing that battle, he split his soul into 4 parts so he could return later. While waiting for that revival, Gaster decided the demons needed a quieter method. Not through force or open war, but through deceit, corruption, and control from within. That was why they worked with humans. By feeding power, support, and hidden help to Voss, Dane, Rook, and Jury, the demons gained hands inside Glora itself. In return, those 4 gained fame, title, authority, and the image of heroes. While the kingdom praised them for defeating a demon king, demons were already slipping into human land in disguised form and building their foothold from inside. The false victory opened every door they needed. Jill saw the truth of his own fall even more clearly after that. The party did not only want to throw away a man tied to death, they needed to erase someone who knew them too well and could one day notice the lie. His body had to disappear. It had also been cleanup. Gaster spoke of the whole plan with open pride. To him, Valzard's old way of ruling through fear alone had been crude. This new method was cleaner. Humans destroyed themselves far more easily when given the right push. A vain woman like Jury could hollow out a town from inside. Men like Dane could turn power into rule. Voss and Rook could do the same elsewhere. By the time Valzard fully returned, Glora would already be weakened from within. Jill mocked the idea that the demons were somehow wiser now. Gaster did not take offense. He only said that a useful servant needed to think beyond brute force. Then he turned his eyes toward Jury and told her it was time to remove Jill. She stepped forward with obvious pleasure. She admitted that quick deaths bored her. She preferred slow, painful ones. Deaths where the victim understood exactly how hopeless everything had become before the end. While Runa remained fixed on Gaster, he was the last face she saw before dying, the last piece of truth left behind from her own betrayal. Jury asked what kind of death he wanted. She listed one magical method after another with open pleasure. Fire, water, ice, lightning. She reminded him that she could use every element, so he could choose however he liked. Jill told her none of those choices suited him. Jury laughed, then raised one hand and cast Flood Jail. Water rushed around Jill from all sides, tightening into a prison meant to drown him. The spell closed fast. Jill answered with Lightning Arrow. Several spears of lightning appeared around him at once. The water prison burst apart, and the remaining current raced back toward Jury through the wet air. She sensed the danger in time and cut the spell off before it reached her. That left her staring in shock. She had never expected Jill to use magic. Jill gave her no real explanation, and he only told her that he could use it now. Jury quickly pulled herself together and decided to overwhelm him with raw power instead. She gathered a huge mass of fire between her hands. It was a high-level fire spell. If she released something like that in a place like this, the mine itself could collapse. The fact that she still chose it only proved how confident she was. Dodging was not enough. If he moved aside, the tunnel would still take the blow. So Jill used Maelstrom. A massive wave formed in front of him and swallowed the fire whole. The flames vanished before they could touch him. Jury stopped moving. That one moment was all Jill needed. He used his speed skill, slipped behind her, and pressed 2 fingers against her back. Then he quietly warned that if she moved, a different spell would pierce straight through her body. This gave him what he wanted. Now, he had full control of the situation. The real revenge could begin. Then he felt something strange through his fingertips. Jury was trembling. She began apologizing. Her voice sounded small and frightened. She turned her head just enough to look at him and gave him yet another story. This time, she claimed Gaster had threatened her and held Stella hostage. According to her, everything she had done had been forced. Even attacking Jill had only been another order. Jill did not believe a word of it. Her lies had already begun to crush each other. The moment she started mixing them together, the cracks became obvious. When he told her that, she suddenly spun around and shouted at him through tears. She said maybe he would never believe her again. Maybe every other word from her could sound like a lie. But one thing was true. She loved him. Then she threw herself into his chest. For a moment, the move was sudden enough that he nearly reacted on instinct. Then something hard struck his stomach. Jury had hidden a knife inside her clothes. She drove it toward his belly and burst into ugly laughter at the same time. Since magic had failed, she had switched to a physical attack. It was the kind of simple choice any real adventurer should think of. Even while trying to kill him, she called him useless again. Jill smiled. That confused her, more than if he had screamed. Then she looked down and finally saw the truth. The knife had not gone in. It had stopped against an invisible barrier around his body. Only then did she remember Dane's special defense. It was his skill now. Jill grabbed her by the throat before she could pull back. He lifted her enough to take her balance and told her that she was going to die. Jury instantly started begging. She claimed she would have spared him if the roles had been reversed. Hearing that only made Jill tighten his grip harder. Then he made his decision. He would not kill her. Not yet. Instead, he would take the one thing she valued above everyone else, her beauty. He told her that just as she had drained young women to keep her face and body, he would now drain her. He would leave her alive, but only barely, long enough to keep breathing, long enough to keep seeing what she had become. Jury refused to believe he could do it. Jill used an energy drain. At once, her body locked up. The life force inside her began pouring out into him. Her skin lost its smoothness. The shine vanished from her hair. The freshness of youth ran out of her face so quickly that even she could feel it happening. Jill then reminded her of something she had forgotten. When she pushed him into the gorge, she had said she loved him then too. That word meant nothing coming from her. It was too cheap and too easy. That was what he had wanted her to understand from the start. By the time he finished, Jury had almost no strength left. Her body had dried down until she looked half dead already. Her golden hair had turned pale and lifeless. Jill dropped her. He told her that in that condition, even her magic would no longer save her. Jury could not accept it. She touched her own face with shaking hands and refused to believe what she felt, so Jill gave her a mirror. He drove an ice spear into the ground in front of her. The smooth faces of the frozen crystal reflected her image clearly. Jury looked. Then she broke. She stared at the reflection and denied it at once. She told herself it was impossible. She touched the ice again and again, searching for the real face she thought had to be hidden somewhere else. When the reflection did not change, panic took over. She began striking the surface with bare hands until the skin split, but even that did not stop her. Soon she was no longer talking to Jill at all. She was talking to the image. She insisted the ugly thing in the ice was not her. Then she started looking around the cave walls and cracks in the floor, laughing and muttering to herself as if her real beauty had simply wandered off and needed to be found. Watching her stumble through the cave like that, Jill felt only disgust. In the end, even her madness was shallow. It was still only about herself. Then Gaster stepped forward again. He looked at Jury with calm contempt and treated her collapse like a minor inconvenience. To him, she had only been a useful tool. Jill asked if that was all human alliances meant to demons like him. Gaster gave him the kind of smile that answered without warmth. Then, he asked what Jill planned to do next. He openly asked whether Jill intended to fight him. Jill had never come to Horus for that. His target had been Juri. A battle with an upper demon was never part of his plan, and he had no reason to believe he could win. Gaster then said he had noticed something strange inside Jill during the earlier fights. It was not the presence of an ordinary human. It felt older and more familiar than that. Jill immediately thought of Velder, but he kept his face still and only called himself a necromancer. Gaster then made an offer. He asked Jill to join the demons. He said Jill was different from other humans, and that difference made him valuable. Jill refused, without hesitation. The softness left Gaster's face at once. Jill had seen too much. That meant he would die there. Runa moved beside Jill and asked for one thing. She wanted magic placed on her body. The enemy in front of them was the same demon who had poisoned her and ended her life. If anyone had the right to face him, it was her. Jill did not argue with that, but she was still only a spirit. Even with anger driving her, she could not fight properly like that. Runa said she knew. She only wanted to do whatever she still could. Jill then asked what magic she wanted. To his surprise, she chose Soil Maker. Jill had taken that spell from Reiner. It created endless soil. He at first thought it would only make a useless mess if cast on a spirit, but Runa clearly had a plan, so he used magic enchantment on her. Soil began pouring out from the center of her spirit body, but instead of falling away, it stayed inside her outline and packed itself into the shape of a full body. In seconds, Runa stood there in a dense earth shell shaped around her soul. It was almost like a handmade golem built just for her. She rushed Gaster immediately. Her movement was sharp and fast. She turned the earth in her arm into a blade and attacked like a true fighter. Then, Gaster moved. Pale flame gathered around his hand, became a blade, and cut through her arm and weapon in one strike. The severed arm hit the ground and crumbled back into loose soil. Jill called her name, but Runa only smiled. More soil flowed into place and rebuilt the arm. The body worked like a golem after all. That gave her a way to fight, but it did not solve the real problem. She could keep moving, yet she still had no clean way to finish him. Gaster ignored her after that and focused on Jill. He formed a pale sphere above his hand and threw it forward. The moment Jill felt the power inside it, he understood that this was not normal magic. It was pure demonic force. He dodged at the last second. The sphere passed him and struck the cave wall behind him. Part of the rock simply vanished inward, as if it had been erased instead of broken. Jill understood two things. That attack would erase him if it touched him directly. And Gaster had no reason to come close, because Dane's defensive skill already stopped physical attacks. He would keep fighting from range until Jill had no answer left. So Jill reached for something beyond his usual skills. He stretched out his right arm and used the bonus skill he had gained from Reinar. That power let him attach almost anything to almost anything else. This time he attached Draconic Blaze to the white arm Veldor had left him. Fire like broken dragon scales danced across his fingers. Then he released it. A blazing pillar erupted from his hand like a dragon's breath shaped into a straight beam. It tore through the cave and punched a new tunnel into the rock. For a moment, Jill thought it had worked. Then the dust thinned, and Gaster was still standing there untouched. He calmly explained that upper demons carried part of the Demon King's power inside themselves. That was why ordinary force, even dragon force, would not bring them down so easily. Before Jill could solve that problem, Gaster created another pale sphere. This time he did not throw it as one mass, he crushed it in the air. A storm of pale lines exploded through the cave, split off walls, and filled the chamber from every side. There was no clean way to dodge all of it. Jill hardened his whole body and prepared to take what he could. Runa stepped in front of him. She spread her arms and used her earth body as a shield. Every demonic line struck her instead. The soil around her blew apart piece by piece, but she stayed there until the storm finally ended. When the last beam vanished, her knees gave out. Jill rushed to her side. The enchantment had already burned away. Her body had returned to spirit form, and now he saw the truth she had hidden. Her hands and feet were fading. Parts of her were turning thin and almost transparent. Runa tried to smile and say it was only happening a little sooner than expected. Jill snapped at once. He told her not to say something so foolish. She could not decide on her own to save him and then quietly disappear. Runa froze in surprise. Even while fading, she smiled and said it was the first time he had spoken so plainly about not wanting to lose her. Jill had no answer. He wanted to grab her, but he still could not touch her. That helplessness only made him angrier. Gaster walked closer and looked down on her with cold amusement. He said a stubborn spirit like her should have disappeared long ago. Runa still answered with a smile. She said she had always been hard to kill. Gaster raised another pale sphere and pointed it toward Jill's head. At that distance, Jill knew he had almost nothing left. He could dodge once, maybe twice, but that would not solve anything. Then Runa told him he could do it. The Those simple words hit something deep enough to unlock the answer. Gaster carried part of the Demon King's power. Runa's unique skill existed for only one purpose: killing a Demon King. That meant it should work on Gaster too. Jill moved at once. He used every ounce of speed he had and slipped behind Gaster before the demon finished firing. Gaster mocked the position for one brief instant. Jill ignored him. He raised his right hand, and a blade of pure light formed from it. Then he drove it through Gaster's back. The demon choked in shock. Jill told him exactly what had pierced him. It was the hero's power that existed to destroy the Demon King. The wound was real. Blue liquid spilled from Gaster's chest. He staggered, unable to hide his surprise. Jill had guessed right. Runa's power worked on him far more cleanly than anything else, but Gaster still refused to die there. He admitted that this new power had gone beyond his expectations and said that killing Jill would now require proper preparation. Then his body began fading into the air. He vanished like mist, pulled back into darkness. Jill thought about chasing him. Then he looked at Runa and knew that was not the choice he could make. He went to her first. Runa was fading fast now, but she still looked pleased. She said she knew he would figure it out, and that he had finally used her power the right way. Then she joked that he could now take over as the next hero while she left in peace. Jill rejected that immediately. He told her to forget it. He had said he would think about it before, but that answer was gone now. He was not made for that role. That only confused Runa more. So Jill told her what he had really decided. Instead of him becoming the next hero, she should do it herself. Runa stared at him like he had lost his mind. Among the new powers he had gained was one that let him attach almost anything to almost anything else. To show her, he picked up 2 small stones and pressed them together. With that skill, he fused them into one larger stone. Runa went completely still. Jill then said, if that skill could attach objects and powers like this, then in theory, it could also attach a soul to a body. That meant there was a chance, not a certainty, but a real chance, that he could place Runa's soul into a new body and return her to life. Runa asked if something like that was even possible. Jill told her that in theory it was, but he had never tried it. It could fail. He made sure she understood that before deciding. Runa did not hesitate for long. She said yes almost at once. She did not want to vanish, and more than that, she wanted to stay with him longer. The last part slipped out, and she immediately became embarrassed. Jill did not press her. He only moved to the next problem. They would need a body. Runa quickly made one thing clear. She would not steal the life of another living person. Jill said he had never meant that. They would use a dead body. Then he lifted his eyes toward the coffin. Inside it lay Stella. There were many dead girls in the cave, but every one of them had already been drained by Jury and dried into a shell. Stella's body was different. The light magic that had once filled her had preserved her far better than the others. Jill did not know how long she had been dead, but she still looked almost fresh, as if she might wake at any moment. With the situation getting worse by the second, there was no better choice. Jill said they would use Stella's body. Runa hesitated right away. Stella had once been Jill's companion, and using her body felt wrong. Jill answered simply, a vessel had to be in good condition, and Stella's body was the only one there that met that condition. Runa did not have time left to search for anything else. He then pointed out the other option. They could use one of the other bodies instead. It might still work, but the result would likely be little more than a walking corpse. That made Runa reject the idea at once. In the end, she agreed. Before starting, Jill warned her of one more thing. Even if the transfer worked, Stella's body had once been ruined by poison. It might still fail to move properly. At best, this would be an emergency measure until they found something better. Runa accepted that too. They moved to the coffin. Stella lay there peacefully, as if asleep. Then he raised his white arm. In his hand was the small crystal that had been serving as Runa's anchor. He activated the merging skill. At once, Runa's spirit body broke apart into countless particles of light. The spiritual thread tying her to the crystal vanished too. The shining pieces of her soul flowed together in one stream and sank into Stella's body. As that happened, Stella's golden hair changed. It turned into Runa's vivid red color. Jill watched closely, unsure whether it had worked. Then the body in the coffin slowly opened its eyes. The color in those eyes was Runa's. The expression was Runa's too. Stella's calm and gentle face had changed just enough to carry Runa's brighter will inside it. Jill quickly untied the ropes around the wrists. He had expected Runa to collapse. Instead, she stood up on her own. That shocked him more than the soul transfer itself. Stella's limbs should have been ruined by the poison, but Runa stood there steadily, then began moving her hands, touching her own face, and testing her body. The more she felt, the more joy spread across her face. She could feel touch again. She could feel her own body move. Jill then asked the question that mattered. How was she standing? Only then did Runa realize it too. Jill quickly thought through the answer. The poison that had killed Runa long ago was likely the same kind used on Stella. Since Runa's soul had already endured it once, that memory may have turned into resistance. Stella's body accepted her soul, and that resistance may have neutralized what remained of the poison. Whatever the reason, it was the luck they badly needed. For a brief moment, Jill even felt as if Stella herself had helped them. He asked whether Runa felt fine. She said she did. Jill still warned her that the body was only temporary. Problems could still appear later, but he also told her the most important part. The skill showed no clear time limit. Unless he released it himself, she should be able to stay in that body. That answer made Runa burst with joy. She spun around, laughed, and celebrated being alive again. Watching her like that felt strangely confusing to Jill. Stella had never moved with that kind of open, playful energy, yet Juri's face still lingered in those features too. The mix of Stella's body and Runa's spirit gave him a feeling he could not sort out. Then Runa suddenly rushed him. She wrapped her arms around him and held him tightly. This time, she did not pass through him. Jill froze for a moment. He could feel her hair against his face and her body pressed against his. Runa thanked him quietly. Jill tried to brush it aside and said he had only done what he could, but Runa refused to let that answer stand. To her, this was far beyond ordinary kindness. Very few people would have done this much. Then she pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. Their faces were close, so close that their foreheads almost touched. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavy. Runa's cheeks grew faintly warm, and when she softly said his name, Jill felt himself tense. Unable to bear the silence any longer, he awkwardly told her she should probably let go. Runa was not pleased. She said she wanted to stay like that a little longer. It had been more than 100 years since she last felt something like this. She asked him to let her have that much. Jill tried to argue that it did not have to be him. Runa answered at once that he was the only one she knew. When he asked how long she planned to stay attached to him, she answered with complete seriousness. An hour. Jill stared at her in disbelief. Runa insisted she meant it, and so, in the dark of that cave, the two of them stayed holding each other for a long while.